could. So I'd like to see that, just because having it all in one place, I know you said it could be on the website and there'd be a list on the website. I'm not sure I can keep track of that many different lists, especially because
Check.
All right. I'd like to call this July 18th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting to order. First, we'll start with roll call. Hisham Akwawad.
Here.
And Syed Safavian. Here. Ajay Chakrapani.
Here.
Sukara.
here.
John Bachman. Here. And our student representative, Honing Huang.
Here.
And I'm Mike Brusco. I'm here. Mark Baumann, our chair, has an excused absence today. First, we'll do approval of today's agenda. Any adjustments, any changes? And I will mention that the published agenda that maybe a number of us looked at had the order of the presentation opposite of what we'll do. We will do the public hearing before we do the update, preliminary draft of the TMP. And next, approval of minutes from June 20th. Any adjustments, changes? Okay, seeing none, we'll consider the minutes approved by common consent. As a reminder, we do have two main topics on our agenda this evening. The first covers the public hearing and deliberation on the critical areas update, and the second will be the preliminary draft of the TMP. For public comments, first we'll do the non-agenda comments, which will begin in a moment. Next will be the public hearing comments, and then finally that would be comments related to the TMP. So any comments non-agenda? Oh.
These are way under $25. These are like $2 each. They are low sugar, all natural from Costco. I got one. They're down on the end later. Really good stuff. Yeah. This is really good.
We used to give out candy, wouldn't
No, the candy's no more. Now we have no sugar stuff.
Mr. Vice Chair, I'm wondering if this is...
Good evening, Planning Commissioners.
This is proper?
Paul Stickney Sammamish.
Sure.
I handed out the organic ketchup, and I don't have too much time today, but I would suggest that you take a watch of my public comments on the last two city council meetings on the 9th and the 16th. And I sent you both copies of what those words were and a link to watch. So I'm going to jump to sort of the end of organic catch-up and add something that I didn't tell the City Council. In my opinion, housing supply numbers have been mostly rooted, especially in town center and other multifamily areas, in far more subjectivity than objectivity. I can't prove this, but I feel subjectivity has been 20%, or excuse me, objectivity 20% and subjectivity 80%. I'm trying to get to 50-50. I want the subjectivity. I want to keep Sammamish, but I want the objectivity of what kind of housing do we really need and what are the true consequences of meeting that housing need or not, hence the organic catch-up. And what I'm talking about is not regional share of target of growth. I'm talking about internal needs over cycle of life. And you've heard me talk about it, so you know all the sections that I've been talking about. But there is one thing I want to talk about today that I didn't get a chance to go over with the council on last Tuesday. There are 3 future comments I'm working on, and I'm going to talk about one of them today. Major themes that were not addressed in setting this growth target that ultimately ended up at 2100. If you think of a big 2100 and put it in a rectangle with 2 long sides and 2 short. I attended all the meetings, have since September of 2013. Now, if I make a mistake on this, I will gladly retract and correct. But as I recall, all those meetings on the growth target, very little time was spent discussing the 1,300 affordable housing target the city had before that time frame. Very little talked about how to make that happen. Very little talked about, on the other side, what happens if missing middle legislation is put in? What does that do to our target? Almost nothing talked about that. There was a lot of what I call false premise. Intentional or not, there were a lot of significant statements and less significant statements made that just aren't authentic. That's one of the top lines, and that had a big influence on achieving where we are. One of the largest was stating that growth targets the whole way through were minimums, where that's absolutely false. It's always been consistent the whole period. Then on the bottom is what I've been working on, quantified internal need factors, and to set targets for the type of housing we need, it's going to take action by our council after weighing all those factors. So I'm suggesting that we toss out the box, redo the sides, and redo the number. That's my comment.
Thank you, Paul. Other comments?
There's a list in the
I think we don't necessarily need to stick to the order, but we like the list so we know how to spell people's names in the minutes. So whoever's ready to go next,
That's for that.
Go ahead.
E is for non-agenda, right?
just for public comment. Yeah.
Hello, this is Mary Wichter. I'm Sammamish for 24 years. I haven't been speaking as long as Paul. He beats me. I started in 2015. But the problems that you hear from me again and again, and the reason I haven't given up, is those problems started in about 2003, and they tried to change code in 2010, 11, and then there were real big problems by 2013, so many that the city had emergency surface water ordinances. So one of the first meetings I went to was actually for the emergency tree retention ordinance, which was passed because there was a lot of development happening and trees were coming down and the landscape was getting torn and things were getting built and nothing was ever getting replanted. And even though the tree ordinance has been adopted, the urban forestry management plan hasn't come a long way. I know it's active and they're doing things, but they dumped a whole bunch of things into it and it really hasn't been happening. So what I see on the ground when I see development permits is I don't see as many people cutting down trees. There are a lot of people that get their permits and you can take out a hazard tree if you need. But what's happening is when construction is happening, the big giant tree that some of them have been there 50 years or more where I live has a giant, it's called a drip line, and you're not supposed to build in there or store stuff in there. And what's happening is the honey bucket gets put there and leaned against the thing and is kind of falling down the slope. And then the great big excavator comes along and it needs a place to park. So instead of parking on the narrow roads where I live or in someone else's yard, it parks right next to the tree in the drip line. Or the shed gets built there, which not really supposed to be doing that either. And there just isn't any recovery for it. So I do like some of the things that are getting discussed in the agenda part with changes made, but there's a lot of things happening with trees that still aren't working, and I think they're really important to have. And then I'm going to turn also to the historic plats. This is the historic plat of Inglewood. It's actually lying this way from the parkway. The whole plat goes to here. And that was having so many problems. It was part of the emergency service water ordinance. And Tamarack abuts it where these red lines cross. And these are very, very small lots on a lot of topography. And they pre-existed development regulations from 1889 to 1964. The first time Washington State had comprehensive subdivision regulations was in 1969. So it took a long time for the problems to build up, the problems to happen. And then I started speaking because I live down here at the bottom, and I'm getting the problems that come from above. So what I want to say is, getting here has taken 20 years with the city experiencing problems and 10 years with me experiencing problems. And it is super important that when we give public comment, I'm not going to be doing this next year because all the topics I've been waiting for are this year. And we really need to consider the topics that come up, what's being said, and you need to take action on them. And if you're a little bit unsure, act anyway, because if you don't, we're going to live another 10 years and I'm not going to stick around for 10 years. So please listen to me and everybody else who has been talking and new people.
Thank you, Mary. Who's next? Please state your name and years of residency.
Oh, gosh, I don't know how many years I've been living here. Lisa Steele, like 6 or something, 7. I didn't plan this, but I also wanted to talk about the trees and the mature trees. And I think it's absolutely vital that we work on truly affordable housing. And I think fiscal responsibility is also such an important topic for people in charge, but I don't think that is antithetical to insisting that we preserve more mature trees, especially in the town center parts that have not yet been set in stone, for lack of a better word. I'm sure you're all aware that Governor Inslee pledged by 2050 to be carbon neutral in Washington State. And one of the #1 most important ways of carbon sequestration is old growth and mature trees. They sequester carbon at a vastly higher rate than small trees. And it's great that they pledge if they cut down a tree, little ones are planted. But we don't, in terms of climate crisis, we don't have 20 years to wait until those lovely little saplings, which hopefully survive, grow to become the type of carbon sequesters that what we actually have right now exists. And I would just like to also quote from the great and yet lots of help necessary to UFMP, the Urban Forest Management Plan, that I think 2019, 2020, when this came out, 360,000 pounds of pollutants were removed from our Sammamish trees, and 88 million gallons of stormwater were saved or retained, and this added $32 million in benefit to the city. So I think the affordable housing, so important piece, the fiscal responsible piece can absolutely go hand in hand with the Planning Commission trying to commit to saving more of our mature trees, because once they're gone, they're gone. Thank you for listening.
And thank you. Anybody else?
I'm Denise Darnell. I've lived here since 2003. So I wanted to thank all of you for being here. I do enjoy coming to the Planning Commission. I feel like your commission is really key because I appreciate that you live in Sammamish. We've met with the developers and some of our other hardworking staff, and many people don't live in Sammamish. And I think that makes a big difference because you're local, you're driving all over the place, you're living within our trees as well. So I feel like you're really committed. And I heard recently from a city council meeting member how you do meet with the city council. And so I really just encourage you to keep thinking as a resident of Sammamish and in talking to your friends and neighbors what they also are wanting for Sammamish. So if you're like me, you also drive to Redmond sometimes and you drive to Issaquah Highlands, and I just think it looks awful. I don't know if you've been to Redmond lately. It is what they want, and I accept that. It is a cement jungle of nonstop traffic and massive development. And those high-rise apartments, I practically break into tears because I don't want those over and over and over again in Sammamish. I go to Highlands, very similar, and all I think about in the Highlands is, wow, I hope there's not an emergency because it's going to be really hard to get out of this place. So I just want us to stop and think. We're at a cusp right now of what we're doing with this beautiful area all around us here. And I really hope, I know there's a lot of pro-affordable housing and development people on city council, but I also want your voices to be heard. And I know I appreciate Mr. Treen, who I feel like is a very big environmentalist on our city council. So listening, he has so much scientific knowledge about our trees. And I just want us to really stop and think what we're doing, because as we all know, it will be too late if we don't do something. I think we need to think carefully about stormwater, about our traffic. We don't have a transit plan in place. Yes, we're talking about, yay, we're going to have transit within 20 years. But what if it doesn't work? And then we have all these buildings and apartments and we don't have it planned. Shouldn't we have the transit built first and then build the apartments and the houses? And lastly, off of what other people are saying, Sammamish is such a special place. We all moved here not because we wanted to go shopping or have more restaurants or cement villages. We moved here because it's gorgeous and we have this canopy and we want to be a tree city. So why are we trying to be like Issaquah Highlands and Redmond? I just don't get it. We have so many international people that now live in our community. I work at a local elementary school, and it's my favorite thing of all is that I meet families from other countries who now live here. And boy, Sammamish has changed since I moved here in 2002 for the better. And those people are not moving here because they want more shopping. They're moving here because it's gorgeous. And why are we ending that? The kids are talking about the trees. They cried when they were in the playground where I work up at Discovery Elementary when the development started being built and the trees were being cut. So thank you for listening.
Hello. My name is Caroline Goulding, and I've lived in Sammamish for 13 years. Thank you for listening to me tonight. Like my friends Lisa and Denise and the group here, I am concerned about Sammamish and the changes in front of us. We had a chance to walk with the developer around the new town center coming, or parts of it. And it was, it was pretty shocking to hear there's going to be a big parking structure and these apartments. And we all know it's coming. But it doesn't mean that we need to demolish and take down every tree in its path while we're doing this. We have a side that has not been developed yet, so what would that be, the north end? And I think there's still time to maybe talk about those trees because it's not too late, and how can we work with those? I live in a very lovely neighborhood here, and we have beautiful, mature probably 80-year-old cedars in my backyard, and they're gorgeous, and it's what makes, as Denise said, this place so special. But the other thing that came to my attention as I was standing there listening to how many apartments are going to be built is, how are we going to get people off the top of this plateau if and when a wildfire comes or an earthquake? And I started going through the Sammamish site for emergency, and I see, you should pack a bag, and you should have food and water. That's not my concern right now. My concern is when a fire comes from Carnation or wherever it might be coming, how are we going to get people out of here? There's not an evacuation route, and if there is, I apologize, I haven't seen it. But my suggestion is we start planning that piece as well as we're adding more and more people, more cars. We need to look at quadrants in the city and say, if you live on this end, here's how you're going to get off. We live on an island, and I think there's somebody in this room who had told me that one day, and it made perfect sense. We are on an island, and we don't want to be Lahaina and Maui. We do not want this beautiful area destroyed and people killed. So please, I ask you, with everything happening, save those trees, but also think about how we're going to get everybody off this plateau should there be an earthquake or a wildfire. It's a big concern. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. Anybody else? Any online?
Nobody online.
Okay. All right, so that will complete our public comment non-agenda items. Our next order of business will be the presentation prior to the public hearing on the critical ordinance update. So, Avril, you'll do an introduction, I guess.
Good evening. Good evening. Avril Beatty. I'm the current Planning and Permit Center Manager in the Department of Community Development. And I'm joined this evening with Jackie Belial, sorry, Management Analyst, and with Nell Lund. I am on fire tonight. From Facet, formerly known as Watershed, our wonderful environmental consultant. Jackie's actually going to start us off with the presentation, which is our public hearing following up the workshop that we had June 6th. Yeah, she's nodding her head yes. So take it away, Jackie.
Thanks, Avril. Just making sure everyone can see my screen and can hear me okay.
Can you please speak up? We cannot hear you very well. Oh, wait.
Oh, dear.
We're getting tech support. You're fine.
All right, let me know when I'm good to start.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So as Avril kind of mentioned, the purpose of tonight's presentation is to review the critical areas ordinance draft one more time and then to hold our public hearing. So I'll do a quick project timeline and then we will review the updates that have been made since our last meeting in June. And then I will hand it back over to the commission to hold the public hearing. So this timeline should look pretty familiar by now. We last met on June 6th, which was our final review of the draft. And then after tonight's public hearing, we will be going back to the city council for them to have a work session. And then they will also hold their public hearing in the fall. And then real quick, I wanted to go over the meeting materials that were included in tonight's agenda packet. So Exhibit 1 is the draft critical areas ordinance, a clean version. And then Exhibit 2 is what we call the red line version. This shows all of the changes and edits that have been made since we began this update. And then Exhibit 3 is a code modifications matrix. So our consultants have done a wonderful job of documenting all of the changes that have been made and including a justification for why those changes have been made. And then the last exhibit has been included in all of our agenda packets, and that is a list of all the meeting dates and the supplemental meeting materials, which also includes all of the written public comments that have been submitted. And then I will go ahead and hand it over to Nell. She's going to go over the summary of updates.
Thanks, Jackie. So following the feedback that we got in the last Planning Commission meeting, we've made another round of revisions to the code, which, as Jackie mentioned, were added to the matrix that you received. And we just wanted to go through the primary edits one by one. It's not a very long list, but we got excellent feedback about removal of hazard trees from critical areas. The draft originally just specified replacement trees at the appropriate ratios under that code section, and based on feedback, we revised that, so we now have prioritized actions that can be taken, which now include a critical areas report that can justify a vegetation management plan, if on-site replacement of some or all of the trees is not sustainable, and then on and off-site options as well. And then for the geologically hazardous areas, that got us, there was a comment about cumulative impacts. As a result of that, we took kind of a deep dive into the critical area content report requirements and then the additional report requirements under each critical area type. And the result of that analysis was that we added a cumulative impacts requirement to the content for critical areas reports. So for all critical areas, that assessment is part of the analysis. And then we reorganize the codes so that those additional report requirements are all follow the general critical area report content requirements. So it's all in one place for people to find. And next slide. And then the riparian areas terminology that we've discussed that aligns with the current best available science from Department of Fish and Wildlife. We took a look at the code to see some locations where it made sense to insert that terminology to align with those recommendations. Those terms were primarily put in under the fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas and streams where it talked about functions and values. But again, as discussed previously, we're still measuring buffers from the ordinary high water mark. And then for injection wells, we confirmed, made some minor edits to that code section to ensure that the hydrogeologic report is required for those injection wells and is prepared by a qualified professional. Yep.
So the recommended action for this evening, there are two options. Option one is move to recommend City Council approval of the critical area ordinance as drafted in Exhibit 1. And then option two is move to recommend City Council approval of the critical area ordinance as drafted in Exhibit 1 and further amended by the Planning Commission through the following. Jackie, do you remember what the following was?
The second option is intentionally left blank. So if the Planning Commission would like to make any recommended changes.
So these are the amendments as presented by Planning Commission.
So we would you would include whatever language you would like to amend.
And so just to recap, and this is listed in the agenda bill for this evening, we are looking to have all maps as advisory. We are not looking to get rid of any maps. This will allow site-by-site review and analysis for conformance with the regulations that have been drafted in this ordinance based on best available sciences, instead of having rough regulations that aren't site-specific, that are from older maps that weren't based on the technology that we have available to us today. I can't really see everybody. Hello. So we just want to point out that this will allow for greater protections in some ways, will allow for consideration of development in others that don't exist currently for maps that aren't advisory. And so we just want to make sure that everyone's making a fully informed decision, and that you're aware that any applications, even if more applications may come in for review, we still have lots of protections in place to review those applications to make sure there's not going to be harm to steep slopes or to the riparian areas or to the wetlands and to the lakes. So we feel like we've put a lot of work into making everything very thoughtful and to balance out, right? We have a lot to protect here. But we also have people who own their homes and their properties who have rights to make their homes more their homes, right? So it's a balancing act. And we feel like through all of the work that we've done over the last 8 months or so, comes to a pretty good balancing act. And so we hope you agree with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So our next step will be any further questions by the Planning Commission before we open up for the public hearing. So any questions, comments, clarifications?
Thank you for the presentation. So I have a simple question. When you said maps are advisory, what does that mean? Because I know there's Mary Victor. She shows maps, and I really like them, and I do agree. Having good, consistent maps are good. So what does it mean by when you say it's advisory only?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to interject to say that that comment was made looking at me because I have been taking it literally in our lessons and I've been peppering them with questions all the time. So I think that was directed at me to say that it is advisory, don't hold your horses back.
I do want to clarify, the maps are not 100% advisory because the critical aquifer recharge areas are determined by the water districts, the water and sewer districts. So they tell us what those maps are. So we don't, those aren't advised. Those are this is what they are. So everything else, so just for the record and anyone new joining us for this evening, advisory maps are if an area is mapped as potentially having a certain aquatic resource or a certain geohazard or a seismic hazard or something, then that triggers staff when people come to us with questions, want to know about what's possible on their property. We can say it's very likely that you have a steep slope, that you have a wetland. You will need to have a qualified professional prepare a report who goes out there and does their very expertise-driven analysis of the site, looking at the topography, the geology, the biotics to determine if something is there, what it is, what its quality is, where it's exactly located so we can figure out buffers. And so by having something be advisory, that allows us to get the information from the real world so that we can do our review to make sure everything's in conformance with all the applicable regulations.
John?
Well, first I want to thank consultant and staff and fellow commission members and council, I guess, on all the work that's gone into this. While the presentation was fairly brief and high level, reading the red lines that go on for pages and pages can understand the depth of analysis and work that had to go into the cleanup and the changes. The specific comments I have are more general, nothing earth-shattering or no suggested changes, but the addition of some flexibility and, as Avriel mentioned, balance. For example, the ability for homeowners to do non-native plant removal and restoration for a limited area with no permit. That's just one example of some increased common sense flexibility. And then a lot of the red line, of course, was just cleaning up the redundancy and overlap with other code, but boy, that was a deep dive. Another small one that I changed that I thought was notable was changing the language from critical areas study to critical areas report. I think that just is a lot more intuitive to us lay people. What is a study? I know what a report is, and then outlining exactly what's required in the report. So, and this is a really, really complex, interwoven topic with so many variables, but I think you've made a good stab at what we were looking for. Thank you.
You look like you're ready to go. Go ahead, lean forward.
No, this is, I follow John in saying that this is a very thorough report, and the fact that we went through it a number of times and you held the ground is fantastic. It's a testament to all the work that the team has done. So it's great. My only question still comes back to one point, which is that if one homeowner is supposed to say that this is what I think is how the flow of water through my property and other things happen, or any other concept that there is, and they hire someone, that person is, I don't want to say predisposed, but has the impetus to say something that is suitable for that homeowner. And if I was the next homeowner, I'm definitely going to get a guy who's going to tell what I'd like to hear. Who becomes the adjudicator in this? Is the city, and do we have the capability for it to happen? Because that, I think, will be something that the council will want to look at. So that's my only remaining question on this one.
That's an excellent question. So the city, as the entity that issues permits, ultimately gets to decide. However, because we have no geologically certified civil engineers or biotic wetland expertise certified people or any of those other people with lots of brains, we have third-party consultants that do those reviews for us. So it doesn't matter what the applicant's consultant says. Everything's taken with a grain of salt, and then everything is sent for third-party review. And there are instances where there's a disagreement amongst experts, and depending on what the disagreement is over or the type of critical area it might be, staff will work with either the Department of Ecology or Fish and Wildlife, or get yet another third-party, fourth-party consultant to break a tie. So it's ultimately the city makes the decision, the city issues the permit. So we have to make sure that whatever we are reviewing, we are confident that everything is in conformance with the regulations.
Got it. That's great. One follow-up remark on that, because you talked about the city. There was one comment by Mr. Eastman in the run-up to today's meeting, and he asked a question about the wildlife corridor that we have, and that why is there not a bird, is there a bird corridor of how they would, the way they'll fly and all of those things, and that's not the case. There's a wildlife corridor that's there. What if the wildlife corridor then shifts direction? Would we still go back to the Department of Ecology or some other department to help us decide what that is, and will that change, and will that come back here, is my question. So I know how we decide wildlife corridors, which is where we let the animals go through, and then we give them more impetus to go through that area, and they get used to it, and it get passed on generation to generation of that. But if something changes, like the gentle lady mentioned, if there was an earthquake, if there was a fire, and something changes, when we change it, I think it'll be good to inform the people this is how we're coming to look at it and change it.
I'll do my best to answer that. So, presently those determinations are made based on, what is mapped by WDFW and then verified by a biologist on site, and then those types of dedications of, preserved, protected corridor areas are set aside in a similar way to buffers. But in terms of the larger landscape and change over time, that's part of a sort of future work plan item that the city might consider investing in. You could do a study to establish a baseline of your habitat patches, locations, conditions, corridor connections, and tree canopy, that sort of thing, and that could be reassessed on a periodic basis. Some other cities like Redmond does that, for example.
I see. So you said that might become part of a study.
That's something that the city could choose to invest in, but doesn't currently have in place.
Got it. Thank you.
Said? The ordinance, the ordinance calls for removal of hazardous tree. So I have a number of questions. Can you give us a little bit more information? What is considered hazardous tree?
So a hazardous tree designation is made by a certified arborist, an ASI certified arborist. So I am not one. I do not have an arborist certification, but I work with staff who do. They do a site visit to assess, signs of disease, tree.
Right, there are kind of two ways of looking at it. One is that there's a diseased tree, the tree that is dying. The other one is hazardous because of the location of the tree. So which one applies to when we talk about hazardous tree removal? Is the tree is in the wrong location, or the tree is dead or dying?
Excellent question. A hazardous tree could be a hazard either because it's diseased and in decline. Sometimes trees kind of look otherwise healthy, but then they have some sort of structural catastrophic failure, such as a massive split will occur down a trunk because there's co-dominant leaders, and in which case, as stated, an arborist report or do you remember what TRAC stands for? Tree risk assessment.
Yes.
I forget what the Q is. Qualification. Thank you. Yay. Go team. There's a form that a certified arborist will fill out and will submit to the city. And just like with critical areas, we also, since we don't have an arborist on staff, we have a contract with a company that has certified arborists, and we send those reports to them for them to look at and verify. And sometimes things are very obvious. They can look at the track form and photos of the tree and see, oh, this coniferous tree is completely brown. It is absolutely dying or dead. No problem, take it out. Other times, depending case by case situation, they might have to go out to the site to verify that there's laminate root rot or a beetle infestation that's not clear in photos and whatever. So we have ways of verifying, and not just someone saying this tree exists, therefore it's hazardous. So there is review involved.
The reason that I asked that question was wondering, but I appreciate the clarification. I was wondering if the tree is just because of the location. So my subsequent question was, can we salvage it, move it to somewhere else? But if it is diseased tree, then there's no need to.
We generally agree you shouldn't relocate a diseased tree. So relocating a mature tree is very difficult and very expensive and very risky. I have heard of cases of like landmark trees in other cities where they spend $100,000 to relocate a tree because it's of cultural significance to that community. And then you always have to, there's a lot of risk that the tree could become unhealthy, and it's a whole thing. We are looking to update our tree regulations in 25, maybe? Yes? Okay. And we're going to be looking at all of it, including the appropriateness of having trees in proximity to structures, and especially if there's ever a wildland urban interface, WUI fire code that's adopted that talks about the fenceable zone. That will all be taken into consideration so there aren't any conflicts. So it is something that we will be looking at in the future, if that answers your question.
Right. And then a follow-up question on that as far as removal of the tree, but with the replacement by the native plant could be a year old, could be a mature tree. Do we have some guidelines that would replace that? Because if you get a tree that is only 6 months old or a year old, there's a tiny little one, it's going to take 20, 30 years to get back to the height and the quality of the shading and all that to the one that you're replacing with.
The tree regulations found in Title 21 do have replacement size minimums for trees.
Okay, thank you.
I don't remember what they are offhand, but they do
That's
exist.
fine. Thank you.
Other comments? Sean?
No, I don't have a comment. I just want to say thank you for all the work you put into this.
Great.
Chair, can I ask one question?
Sure. Go for it.
I know. So there was one question that came up on a cherry blossom tree in my neighborhood, because I had to remove the cherry blossom tree because its roots were coming down to the road and had the chance that it would approve the pavement. And that came up, and so that's why we had to take that tree out. Is that because you said that it is a disease tree or something. This is not a disease tree, but this was definitely going to uproot the pavement and possibly the road, which would have cost the city a lot more money to fix. And so I was told we should go ahead and take that tree out. Is that a factor as well for the trees or not?
So I don't know all the specifics of yours, but I'll say generally, there are circumstances where there's a otherwise healthy tree that might be very close to the public right of way or by a sidewalk.
Yeah.
And because of, we need walkable sidewalks, ADA requires us to have walkable sidewalks. And so if there's uplift and there needs to be maintenance, it's possible that the tree roots can't be safely removed to make those public infrastructure improvements. And in which case, if you cut those roots, then the tree becomes a hazard physically.
Yes.
So potentially, yes. Does that answer your question?
So you're saying it's case by case?
Yeah, a lot of it's case by case.
Okay.
Avril, if I could highlight the tree rule, the tree regulations that apply in this case are those really that are specific to the critical areas rules. There are a whole host of other rules in the city regarding tree removal and management of trees that take place outside of critical areas. So the rules that we're talking about tonight, I just want to highlight and make sure everyone's aware, are specific to critical areas. And generally speaking, you're not allowed to remove a tree in a critical area or its buffer unless there are certain circumstances that are being highlighted here. Really, it comes down to vegetation management that's appropriate or a hazard tree condition that's documented as was described by the staff.
Thank you. Do you have any comments?
Not much from me, but again, just want to reiterate what everyone said. I think this was a wonderful document. Really managed the technicalities and complexities very well.
So, I also agree with that. However, well, the comments, and Ajay brought up the email from Mr. Eastman that had a couple of things that I think we should at least mention because it could affect whether we make amendments or recommend amendments. And one was a concern, which I have to admit I didn't have time to go back and read carefully through the code, but it was whether the wildlife, the corridor classification, lumping, as I think he was saying, the classifications of crawly animals, 4-footed, 3-footed, 2-footed animals, birds and fish all lumped together would have the unintended consequence of causing much more of Sammamish being a critical area, critical corridor than might be intended. So I'm wondering I don't know if you had a chance to read the email or not, but if you could comment on that. Because I know when I was reading this originally, I was like thinking, okay, here's the corridor, based on the kind of things now that you were saying. Mm-hmm. And he was raising a concern that actually there might be a broader, classification, broader area that would be considered critical because of the amount of wildlife, especially birds, that might be coming through. Does that, and I know you haven't had a chance to read this, so it's a little unfair, but it could affect how we make any kind of amendments to our recommendations.
Sure. The primary new code language that calls for the corridors is under the wetlands section, and the intent is to ensure that as development and planning occurs, that there are some connections between upland and aquatic habitats that animals need. And there is a width specification, I believe, in that
Various
wetlands
buffers.
code.
Yep.
I think it's 100-foot width. So it is limited in scope. So you could have, a forested area that's, many acres, but you wouldn't be required to protect necessarily all of that, under the regulations that we're speaking of.
You might want to take a look at, because I think he was concerned that the corridor itself would increase, not just the buffer to the corridor. So something to maybe look at in the further review. There was one other comment that he made, and it was about seasonal streams. And the seasonal streams, some of them are natural, but there are some that are caused by, stormwater runoff due to sewers and so forth. And in that case, it's sort of a man-made seasonal stream. And his concern was whether that should, or his question was whether that should be designated as a seasonal stream, because in fact, as he was stating, when that is dealing with, stormwater runoff through a pipe that Sammamish might have put in, and you can have pollution going down, and therefore that polluted stream, man-made polluted stream, would be protected, and probably shouldn't be. So that would be something else that I think it could be an unintended consequence of including all seasonal streams. That's okay. And this was sort of, this afternoon late, so I know my questions aren't as formulated as I might have liked to. I think it's like 2:40 or something. Yeah. Yeah, I usually check email like kind of not long before coming here, and it's like, oh, this one I didn't see earlier, so.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we'll have to take a more in-depth look at that maybe
We might
after the
consider
fact.
like an amendment just to suggest looking at
Yeah.
that and making sure that.
But I can say, just generally speaking, that those distinctions in urban environments where we pipe and ditch and modify flows is something that is routinely looked at, and there are typically provisions in the code that only regulate a constructed stormwater feature like that may have seasonal or perennial flow if it is accessible to fish or conveyed a historic stream. Those are usually the two criteria. And they do need to be regulated or reviewed from a perspective of water quality and habitat. And
I'll add to what Nell's saying here. So David Pyle, Community Development. So if you look at on page 111 of the packet of 453 under item 356, it defines streams. And this is an existing definition that I don't think we modified, right? So it says specifically under the definition of stream, so in order for you to have a stream, you have to have the characteristics that meet the definition. Critical areas are driven not by maps, maps are advisory, instead they're driven by definitions. So what you would have to do is have your qualified professional who is qualified to identify these parameters go out to the site and actually do an analysis and produce a critical areas report identifying whether or not you have these parameters on site. And it says those areas in the city where surface waters meet the criteria contained in WAC 222-16030, which is the Department of Natural Resources water type and classification system, and produce a defined channel or bed, not including irrigation ditches, canals, storm or stormwater runoff conveyance devices, or other entirely artificial water courses, unless they contain fish habitat or are used to convey streams naturally occurring prior to the construction of such water courses. For the purpose of this definition, a defined channel or bed is an area that demonstrates clear evidence of the passage of water and includes, but is not limited to, bedrock channels, gravel beds, sand and silt beds, and defined channel swales. The channel or bed need not contain water year-round for the purpose of defining the following categories of streams, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm in the 24 years I've been doing this, I've come across many scenarios, as Mr. Eastman has identified, and staff and our consultants that support us do very thoroughly evaluate whether or not the parameters identified in the definition are present and whether or not it constitutes a stream. Sometimes we disagree with applicants. And when that happens, we go for another analysis. Usually we would include for fish for streams, we would use the Department of Fish and Wildlife, who would then provide assistance in review of the state definition. So there is quite a thorough process. There's also means by which applicants can appeal it if they don't agree. I've seen these things go on and on for years where we're in disagreement. Usually the city prevails.
Thank you. That was very thorough. How did you find that so quickly? I was impressed. Here's the exact code. That actually answered the question perfectly. Okay, so we should open for the public hearing. And comments, public hearing. There must be some. Okay, Mary, you seem to be moving.
Hi, Mary Wichter, Sammamish since 2000. I do want to say I think the staff and the consultants are great, and you guys did a ton of work, and I can see it. But our job is to review and try to get those things changed that have been bugging us for 10 to 20 years, so I really like that. So I sent in one of the Planning Commission people in the past that has an architect background, actually did these steep slope maps. So in the comp plan, there's a gray one that just kind of shows you where they are, but you can't really zoom in on it. And then in the Tamarack and Inglewood, those are from the city ordinances. Those are just for historic plats. This is an outline of like the landslide hazard and the steep slopes and a few other ones. And you can actually zoom down onto it to a parcel basis. And it's based off of 2003 data from King County that the city adopted. And it's based off the same data set that the Inglewood and Tamarack. So it's kind of the way to get the steep slopes map for the entire city. And then a couple months ago, boom, I logged on. Sammamish Property Tool has little steep slope blobs on it. So I looked at the Tamarack and Ingle ones, and I looked at those. Where the steep blobs are, those are really steep. If it says it's steep, you don't even have to go out there. You can look at the contour lines, and they're all stacked up on each other. And it's also right where all the problems I talk about come from. So that's why you hear me steep slopes a lot. And I actually realized my shirt kind of looks like a steep slope map tonight. So hopefully that will stick with you. Anyway, the sad thing is the geologically hazardous area code, you didn't really do that. You just left the other things in and put it in, and I think it will work. I've seen cities do it two ways. Some have actual geohazard code, and then some have just a name for it, and then keep the existing erosion and landslide code. But what's missing is the steep slope hazards. They're still only defined under one definition. And they're not in the code at all, except when you go to landslide of the 8 cases or whatever, it's just one and it says 40% or more. And then the really demeaning thing to me is, oh, if you hire one of those professionals, you can just say the buffer is 0. There's not even a 15-foot landslide buffer. And I'll tell you, so I live in a lot that was built, and there's landslide on half of it, and then it's at the bottom of the slope. And where it's constructed, there aren't problems, but you want to be able to take your wheelbarrow or your yard waste bin, and you want to be able to walk around your house. And if you don't have at least a 5-foot buffer, I mean, you can't get that heavy yard waste can around. So we really need to have a buffer and a setback. And I know your original tables said you were going to have steep slope buffers on the top and the bottom and then the side. And then the stormwater people came in and took away the bottom buffer, which I'm still really, really worried about. So steep slopes, we really need to have them. We really need to have them protected. In your critical areas report, I'm glad you got rid of that study report thing because it was always really confusing to me. You have that you have to show erosion, you have to show landslide, but it doesn't say you have to show steep slopes. And I'm literally telling you there's at least 3 permits around me right now that have steep slopes, and they're still not identified. And one of those actually has one of those state-defined streams, which comes from a stormwater thing. So I live in the middle of it. I see it. I see how it is, and I know how hard it is to do. So anyway, I really think we need to get the steep slopes in there. So I hope that would be one of your option 2 amendments, is really make sure that steep slopes are covered, that they're shown, that there is mapping. The definition also goes to real code, and maybe we need to look at other cities for what they do. On the injection wells, I'm glad this stuff was done. Those are prohibited for class 1 and class 2 CARES, but not for class 3. I will tell you there was an LRIG thing over in Issaquah Highlands. The water district actually paid $1 million to not have them do it anymore because the injection well ended up with E. coli and other things. They had problems. I would try to avoid injection wells wherever you can. There is one above me that I think is not recorded. They need to be reported to ecology. And the city actually said if they knew then what they know now, they never would have permitted it. It was a big mistake. So it's not really great to hear those things later. I also, under the injection wells, it talks about If you have septic fields that are draining and weeping through and seeping onto the people below, you have insufficiently treated septic, and that does cause water quality problems. It can hurt stormwater ditches. It can go down stormwater things and end up other places, including streams where we are trying to save the kokanee. Right now, the King County is looking at their code and the state code for septics. I did get that you couldn't put stormwater down that would ruin a septic, but I was never able to get the staff to understand the other way needs to happen. You shouldn't be putting septics where they can go interact with stormwater and cause problems for downhill. So I'd like to see that code, and maybe that code doesn't go in critical areas code. Maybe that goes with septic to sewer conversions, and maybe that goes with development regs phase 3. But that's probably the most important stuff that plagues me where I live. There is green slimy water. The frogs have been dying. There aren't as many gnats anymore, and you're not supposed to touch the water because it's really bad for kids or pets, and I can't get any code or anything to do about it. So that's another one of my topics this year that's hot with everybody, including King County and the state. I'm glad to see the shorelines getting done. I mostly looked at the red line. I'm a little bit worried about the stormwater code working with critical areas code, because the stormwater team is great and you guys are great, but like in the stormwater code, we got that at 0 square feet in Tamarack and Inglewood, you have to have a review, and you're trying to still allow the 1,000 square feet added on the footprint, but then you need a drainage review. So I think you need to look at in critical drainage areas, which we got a lot of work to get that map done. I just think the stormwater people and the critical area people need to work together, because like Stephanie Sullivan is really great and Avril is really great and the consultants are really great. We just need to make sure that we're not stepping on our toes. I literally think if you have built in a landslide hazard area or a geologic hazard, you're lucky that you got to build there, and you shouldn't get to add a whole bunch more things, because you literally shouldn't have built there. We should have had TDRs and it should have transferred into another center area. So we're not trying to make it easy for those to build, and Tamarack has over 40 vacant lots left, and I think the last time I looked at Inglewood, there's 165 lots, so you're talking 300, 400 lots still. Those are all lots that are not the easy lots to build on. They're the ones with the steep slopes and the trees that need to stay, and the wildlife corridor through the connected canopy. And if you will give density bonuses and incentives to get those to town center, you will save a lot. You won't save the trees in town center, but you'll save the trees that all the wildlife uses. So that's why I talk about this so very much. The notice on title is crucial. You need to make sure you have a template that they're done regularly, and they do have to prove that they recorded them, because sometimes those recordings are not visible for a while. I'm glad to see the word TDRs is in there, and we should have TDRs. It's the only tool that you can allow to avoid developing in critical areas. I think you should have a list of maps so everybody can see them and know where they are, or make it a library. Photos are really important. Everybody has cell phones. It is hard to take a lot of things, but if they show where their thing is on the map with the contour lines drawn, we can do it. Anyway, I didn't have time to write it all up, but I talked about half of it, and I'll email it in after tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Other comments?
Karen Herring. I've been here 25 years. I'm going to read something that hangs on my door. Sorry, I'm nervous. A piece of land not so very large, which would contain a garden, and near the house a spring of ever-flowing water, and beyond that a bit of wood. That was written by Horace. And this is the home that I found 25 years ago and my family purchased. Now, half of the wood is gone because a giant yellow box is where those woods used to be. It ignored a critical buffer and built with equipment coming up and down the driveway. And that driveway is in hold for restoration because we know that there's a permit waiting to build a deck that's already been built, and it's been in corrections for years. So this critical area is on the Laughing Jacobs Creek in Sunny Hills, and this creek was dug out in 1950 by Army Corps of Engineers from Little Beaver Lake and runs all the way through Sunny Hills behind a bunch of homes and older homes and down to Laughing Jacobs Lake. I'm here to speak for the wildlife on critical areas. My home is a critical area. When Councilmember Roisin O'Farrell came to my home, she said, "Karen, you live in a storybook house." And I said, "Our storybook house is really about the property. It's a wooded wonderland with the creek that runs through it. It's called a seasonal creek or a perennial creek, but right now it is still running and it's July. So something is changing in this city and the water is changing and we still have water in a seasonal perennial creek. Now fish don't come up here, but salamanders, snails, I once met a river otter in that stream, ducks and birds live in that creek, and they are there year-round. And I'm asking for critical areas to get every single possible protective consideration from every human being and our code. And April mentioned about all the brains. Here are all your brains. Here are all your brains. This city has a lot of brains. Let's start listening to one another and our experiences because they matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Well stated. Other comments?
I really don't want to follow that. Hello, Kent Treen, Sammamish, 14 years. I've gone through this document, I don't know how many times, quite a few, and it is pretty impressive and it's a little overwhelming at times, but there's definitely some corrections that need to be made on the document, just on the text itself. And so I'll give you just one example, but I think there's 3 or 4 more that I found as I was going through. But it's, according to my packet, it's page 13 of the 422. It's number 5 under the critical areas report, and it's listed. It says critical areas report, critical areas report, critical areas report. So it's listed 3 times there. Clearly a typo or a copy. That's a Scribner error. So if we could just remove the text there on that particular Scribner error. I also noticed that there's a few others, so if someone would just read through that, you'll find them. The second one was that, okay, and this is a little technical and probably not necessary, but when we teach outlining to students in the high schools and even in middle schools, if you have a 1, you have to have a 2. If you have an A, there's a B. And there could be a C, D, E, and all that rest, you know. So just, you have a couple spots in there where you just have a 1. There's no 2 to it. So I don't know how you want to fix that, or if you want to even fix it. It's super minor. Most people aren't even going to notice or catch that. As a school teacher, it just stood out to me. Okay, the next thing, page 9. I'm going to just skip page 19 because I think someone else is going to speak on that. On page 22, let me go up to page 22 really quick. Went too far. Page 22, it's about mitigation, maintaining, and monitoring. And the only thing that when I look at this, it doesn't have any teeth to it. So it's kind of like, it's one of those things where if it's not feasible to mitigate on the development, that's under 4A, states it right there, then, we can do something else. So what is the something else? Or in this case, it's like, at what point can the city just say, no, that you can't do that? We want to do X, Y, and Z. No, I'm sorry, you can't actually do that because there's no way for you to mitigate it or us to maintain it or for us to monitor it. Okay, so I don't see anywhere where there's enough teeth underneath that if a developer came in here and actually said that they couldn't do something, then where's the teeth that the city could just say, no, you don't get the permit, figure out a different plan, or move your building, or change your drainage. Page 33, sorry, I did go through this a little bit in detail, but page 33 on your Karen, the Cara or Karen, depending on how Mary spoke to this already, so I'll just be brief. Pretty much no injection. Anywhere, I think it's also on page 37, where it talks about at the discretion of the, and sorry, David Pyle or whoever is going to be the staff person, director that's going to make the discretion here. But the reality with the forever chemicals that can enter into our aquifers and our drinking waters as those who govern, as an individual, I make a contract, a social contract with the people who are governing me. I happen to be one of them, so hallelujah. But the reality is, I have to protect the safety of the person, number one. Protect your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So your life, clean air, clean water, safe food, police protection, military, hopefully we don't need that. But the reality is that's what the 7 members of that council are supposed to do for us. So if there's any possibility of their getting toxic or harmful chemicals into our water system, it should be not allowed. Because the only other, the unintended consequences of allowing injection then, so let's let them do that, I think totally a bad mistake, is that then we'd have to pump all of our water that's now tainted to some purification place that that doesn't exist for us right now. And we would have to build that on the taxpayer's dime or through grants if you get lucky. Well, that's what Issaquah is doing right now. So learn from Issaquah and say, they allowed injection, huge mistake, okay? So learn from Issaquah, no injection. Sorry, Mary, you and I don't disagree on that one at all, do we? Okay, this is further down, I think it's 7A in there too, talks about, there's a couple things that it talks about in the Karens that could be allowed if you had certain mitigations for it. I just think you should just take it, just say not allowed, right? And that is where on the cars, we got the 2 up on the top of the hill, right here. No automotive repair and services. Just simple. Have them be somewhere else. They can be in Issaquah, they can be in Redmond. Heck, I'll take them out to Falls City. I'll take my car out there, all right? So I would just say in the city of Sammamish, because of our topography and our critical areas, and because we have clean water still, let's keep it that way. And I would eliminate that. If you have the page 50 is under the wetlands. Come on. This one is dear to my heart, and you've heard other people talk about this too tonight already. But page 50, number 4. Fine on the banking, if you can figure that one out, great. I don't know who's going to fund that, but is under this fee in lieu mitigation. Wow, that's I just wonder if under 1A it talks about the approved wetland impact is related to the approval of a single family home in the city of Sammamish capital improvement project or development proposal within the town center. So all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second. So I get it for a single family, like fee in lieu, like what as a single, it's going to be so expensive. I'm just not even going to do it. Or most homeowners don't have the money there. They're not going to pay the fees because it just makes their project almost not feasible. But the town center, what they're going to do is they're just going to pay the fee and then bury the wetland. That's the unintended consequence. So when we look at the north end, and I think one of the other people talked about that, when the 2 quadrants that nothing's happened in them yet, Those are covered with trees. There's some critical areas. There's some wetlands in there. George Davis Creek runs right down. It's also a Cara. And so it's like, wait a second. I should be protecting the water quality. And so a fee in lieu may be something that I would just strike out where it says within the town center and just say, no, you don't get to pay a fee. You got to just fix the problem, which leads me to the last point that I'll make. Is my time up?
You'll be able to wrap up soon because your time's up.
Are you going to talk about the regional stormwater definition? You need to change the definition of the regional stormwater facilities. That is not even. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
I don't have a bunch.
Yeah. Debbie Treen, lived in Sammamish for 14 years. I have just broad statements. I'm not editing a document. I'm really not good at that. But I want to comment about wildlife corridors. They're referenced in this document, but we don't really have a map of them, and we don't show how they're connected beyond just the critical area. And so I would ask the Planning Commission to add that to its plan for this, to create that map. And so we know where we're going to actually have deer and cougars and bobcats and bears and birds, which is, I agree with our previous testimonies, the reason why we live here. It's not because we have great shopping and good restaurants. It's because it's a beautiful area to live. And actually, more than just the beauty, the connection to the rural area to which we are adjacent. We are designated within the urban growth boundary, but right next to us is the rural area. We are not the same as other communities where they're surrounded by urban growth area too. And we need to be cognizant of the kind of the transition zone that we are for the rural area to the urban area. We cannot just have 10-story buildings. I used to see this in Portland in their urban growth area. You'd have a 10-story building and a farm across the street. We shouldn't be that way. We should have some transition for the wildlife. I made a comment as testimony was going on about the seasonal streams. I mean, isn't a seasonal stream that's actually formed when there's storm events kind of an indication of a failure? It needs to be protected, because if you don't, where's that water going to go? It's going to go on someone else's yard. And so I do think seasonal streams are just as important as our natural ones in the sense that every storm event, we're going to have more and more of them. We're flowing sediment and toxic chemicals into the good streams, or the constant streams. Hazardous trees. I just want to make a comment about hazardous trees. We have about 100 trees on our yard, and a lot of them are really mature, old trees. And when they fall, we try to just leave them. If they're not going to fall on the house, they're not doing any harm. They go to the ground, they decompose, they form soil. Sometimes they're nurse trees. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to be cut down and removed. There are ones, obviously, where that's the case, but I just want to allow for just kind of the natural evolution of our land, which comes when trees fall. The last thing, well, not the last thing, but in the exceptions to wetland protection, I do want to support Councilmember Treen's comments about wetland banking and fee in lieu. It's one of the big frustrations of living here in Sammamish is that the rules that apply to most development don't apply to the town center. And I just don't think that's good business. They're having just as big an impact, and in some cases way more impact, on our environment, on our stormwater, on our streams and buffers and wetlands. And they should not be allowed to just buy their way out of it. We need them to set the example for the community in terms of how development can be done in a way that's environmentally sensitive and protects our sensitive areas. What's more sensitive than development where there's just going to be a sea of concrete? That needs to be mitigated, and this is the ordinance that needs to do it. I also would like to support adding an arborist, because when we talk about dangerous trees, hazardous trees, diseased trees, I don't want to rely on a consultant. I really think the city, we've grown to the point where over 60,000 people, I think pushing 70. I mean, we should have an arborist on staff that is available for residents to get information from and to advise us on appropriate development and retention of trees. There was one other issue. Oh, regional stormwater facilities definition. I really, really, really am frustrated by this one. We watched that be interpreted to allow vaults, just a larger vault, that only serves 2 parcels adjacent to each other with exactly the same land use on them. How the heck is that a regional stormwater facility? The definition is being corrupted. To me, if we talk about it, the only place that really makes sense is the town center, but it could apply other areas of town, it's an open stormwater pond. It's taking advantage of a wetland and the streams that exist in the area and enhancing them to form a detention area that is actually of regional significance. It could include wildlife habitat, it could include trails and connectivity, bike trails, and instead we're allowing all of the stormwater to be retained in vaults. And when you do a vault, you have no choice but to bulldoze every single tree, because you can't dig a vault and save a tree. So I really would love to see our critical areas ordinance address the need for, really, when we use the term regional, make it regional and make it something that functions in terms of serving wildlife, serving stormwater, serving a critical area. So that's my comments. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Debbie.
Nothing online.
Anybody else? I don't think we've typically done it round 2.
Let's do it.
But we'll have a chance to have some further discussion with the Planning Commission here. Okay, so we'll close the public hearing and we'll entertain a motion and then discussion and dialogue about this. So.
I can make a motion with the staff recommendation of option number 2. And the option number 2 was the one that indicates that the Planning Commission has some ideas that we want to add to that. And I want to add the inclusion of wildlife corridor map, recognition of that, and have that as a part of it.
Before we do, let's make sure we have a second to the motion, and then we'll begin to discuss and identify amendments to that first motion. Yeah,
Okay.
so do we have a second? Okay, we have a motion, a second. So we'll now have discussion about the motion. And said you wanted to propose some amendments.
Addition of wildlife corridor map, is, preparation and inclusion in the ordinance. And the second one is hiring an arborist as a staff to deal with the critical area ordinance issues and things that needs to be done.
So you're making recommendations for 2 additional amendments.
2 additional amendments. Wildlife corridor map and hiring an arborist.
And so we should have a discussion on each
Absolutely,
in
yes.
turn. So other discussion about the map proposal, the proposed amendment.
Can I ask a question from staff? David, we don't have one, right? We don't have a wildlife corridor.
We do have one from King County. It's more of a regional map. We do not have the budget or resources to create a map. So I would say that I understand your objective here. However, that would take the council allocating resources for us to then engage a qualified map maker to go about making the map. That would require a work plan item and a contract with that consultant. So it's not something that really could be achieved with this project. It's not really a text change to the regulations, and therefore our response, if the commission were to recommend inclusion of that and forward that on, would be exactly what I'm saying to the council, is that we do not think it's something that is within the scope of the project. We think it could be the result, a work plan result from the project, and we'd be happy. We would love to have a habitat map like you're talking about, but we do need our city council, who are our fiscal stewards, to tell us that we have the funding for that and to place it on our work plan so that we can engage our limited staff resources in creating that map.
Okay, so let's talk about that. This is nothing. You said that we already have one from King County, is general. So we're not going to start from point zero. We're going to basically, whoever does it, the consultant that prepare a map, they're going to use that as a basis, whatever the county has, and refine it.
So I'm not going to get into debating the methodology by which that map would be created here at the dais. I don't think that's productive. If you want us to create a map, we would then go about researching what the science would be, what the resources would be needed, and then we'd come forward with a proposal as to how to create the map.
So right now, in the absence of that, how do you assess a development project as relates to the wildlife corridor?
So it's more based on the proximity to other regulated critical areas, defined critical areas. So within proximity to a wetland or a stream, and whether there are structural conditions or forested structural conditions, whether there are actual, think about the right way to say this, features that would support wildlife or those species that we are regulated to try to provide habitat for. I don't know if Nell wants to add to that.
So what would happen if I change my motion and go with the consideration? Would that be softening that position, that council can look at it and realizing that this was something that we discussed and we wanted kind of reaction from city council?
I would think that you could say you strongly recommend that staff take on with the 2025 work plan the creation of and delivery of a habitat map that meets best mapping practices and meets the needs of our critical areas ordinance and our community.
That's perfect. Yes.
So that would take that from being a amendment to the original motion, and we could add that as a recommendation.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense. And the second was about
Arborists.
which also would have similar budgetary
Exactly
impacts.
the same thing. I'm going to ask that question. Let's say again, you have a development project. You have to pay from your budget to a consultant outside to do the work that the arborist does. So you get that money from as not an impact fee. You get that as a part of the fee that you charge a developer, right?
That's correct. So when we come across a situation or there's a component of a project that requires arborist review, which generally is when someone's proposing a removal of a tree that is outside of the outright allowances or that's considered to be hazardous, diseased, dead or dying, or otherwise compromised, then we want a verification that that condition is in fact what they say it is, because some people don't like trees. It's a reality. And so what we do is we would route that to a third-party on-call consultant, but the applicant proposing the action is back billed for the cost of that. So it's not actually an expense borne from the city's budget. Instead, it's a pass-through cost that's back billed back to the applicant through the permit fee. So the city could do the same thing with its own a staff arborist, like it does with permit staff that review plans. We would assign a per hourly rate. We would then back bill the applicant for the time spent, et cetera. However, really, it's a staffing decision that's made by the council and city manager as part of the budget process. We will do what we can with the resources that we have, and we feel that we do a pretty good job with trees. There's not a lot of error. We could do better, don't get me wrong, but in this case, we are already generally engaging an on-call consultant with critical areas, because in this case We're talking about critical areas rules and trees related to critical areas rules. So we already generally are engaging an on-call consultant. Our on-call consultant contracts for critical areas services for qualified professionals, wetland scientists, stream scientists, habitat biologists, geotechs, also include qualified arborists. So they're bundled in with that service. So what we would say is we'd say, hey, consultant A, we need you to review this report, and it includes a wetland report and a hazard tree in the buffer removal, and we need you to assess those for us and verify the information. They would then engage their wetland scientist as well as their arborist. In some cases, they have wetland scientists that are also arborists, which is extremely efficient when that happens. And then they would review that report and provide their findings.
So in those cases, the client is not the developer. The client is the city.
The client, yes. So in all cases,
the on-call service is between the city and the consultant.
Absolutely.
The city.
And there's a firewall between the applicant, the development permit applicant, and the city's consultant. We communicate with the consultant. The applicant does not. The applicant does not pay the consultant. The applicant pays the city, and the city pays the consultant.
And what happens if the applicant has his own arborist? Then would you still go through the process and have your on-call service to verify the accuracy of the information that the developers arborist suggesting?
In the case of critical areas, yes. There are other scenarios that are not related to critical areas where it's a hazard tree removal or a tree removal that is outside of a critical area, and whereby they're giving us information that is stamped, if you will, by their qualified arborists. We look up their credentials. They are in good standing with the International Society of Arboriculture. They meet all of the credential requirements, and we would then allow that without sending it to a third party. However, in the case of critical areas, because as was stated, trees are a very important component of our ecology, and allowing a tree to fall, when there's no target, there's no reason to allow someone to cut it down. They might snag it or abate some other risk. But so in the case of critical areas, yes, we do send it to the third party in every instance.
So do you have a problem of, again, back to my changes that I would like with option number 2, to use your language for both, for the wildlife corridor as well as arborists, strongly suggest that and let the council to look at it and see if it makes sense.
In that case, it would be that the council strongly suggests the addition of an arborist on staff with the 25-26 budget cycle.
Okay.
Other potential recommendations or amendments?
So, more comment on the arborist. A lot of this comes down to funding and funding sources. And I'm not going to ask David to opine on that, but we could recommend to council that we hire a staff arborist, but recognize that very likely permit fees alone wouldn't support such a position, and then that would require general fund money
to supplement that.
to supplement it, and given our current fiscal forecasts, things could be tight. So just, I'm not terribly opposed to the recommendation, but just recognizing the realities of what we might get. I think the really important component here is the city does have mechanisms to employ outside expertise when it's needed. And for the critical area stuff, not having to pay for it directly.
Well, the other thing on that this position doesn't have to be full-time, it could be part-time.
So let's focus on amendments. And then what I'd like to do is then come back. We'll probably end up with maybe a few other recommendations.
Sure.
And we'll work quickly through those at the end once we've thought about all of this to determine which we might want to put in the letter that goes to City Council. So other potential amendments.
I just have one question. So if we hired an arborist on staff, let's say we hire an arborist on staff, do we have a general idea of how much time is that person going to be actually working on for the city in this case? Do we know that it's going to be 80 hours a month, 40 hours a month, or 200 hours a month, or something like that? Because isn't that the first qualification to decide if it's going to be full-time or not?
So we have a certain volume of permit review for trees. We could model out the number of hours that we use our on-call consultants fairly easily, as we have records of all of our task orders that go off to our third-party consultants. However, I don't, as was stated by Commissioner Bachman, I don't think, or Bachman, excuse me, very close. That it would not necessitate a full-time staff person. And it is also quite complicated to hire part-time staff, so there's that wrinkle as well. And we do have a very challenging fiscal outlook. And any additional recurring costs, which come in the form of staff, are very difficult to navigate going forward when we're looking at a potentially contracting workforce.
Hence your 25-26 comment?
It would have to be considered as part of the 25-26 budget and would need to be included with the city's fiscal forecast going forward, where we're looking at the crossroads of where the city's recurring budget general fund expenses exceed the general fund revenues.
Just one more question. As we get forward on the town center, would that change this equation in some way? As we are looking at all of these things and working for 2044, is that going to change something that you obviously see? I'm not asking you to predict it, but obviously see that we would need it, or you don't see that at all?
Well, we have sort of an infinite capacity with on-call arborist support. So we feel that because we have that, and we carry not just one arborist contract, but we carry, not only do our critical areas on-call consultants carry the arborist credential bundled with their other credentials, but we also have independent arborists that are just arborists and urban foresters and carry arborist and urban forest credentials that we use for permit review, development review that's back-billed, but we also have the option to use that if we wanted to for city-funded initiatives or efforts that the city is wanting to pay for out of the general fund. So we are able to then mobilize that contract for that purpose as well. It is a very flexible alternative going forward and allows us to be responsive to needs that we might have that we might not be able to forecast. And it also allows us to be responsive to permit volumes that are very hard to forecast. It's really hard to understand the cyclical nature of development and to try to forecast out how many permits you might have in a certain year. And that is part of also the challenge of staffing appropriately in the work that we do.
Okay. You answered that pretty thoroughly. Thank you.
Can I follow AJ's question or comment? David, we have quite a number of parks, city parks. So Park and Rec, I'm surprised, or I don't know, do they have an arborist? They're dealing with the maintenance and operation of the parks?
They also have on-call contracts, as does our Public Works Department, for arborist services. They have staff that have arborist expertise and are able to help guide task orders and work requests of their on-call consultants. But what they do is it's on a demand basis, so they don't have somebody in-house that is available. The one thing that we don't have as a city that I just want to be, I'm being transparent, I'm not advocating either way, is that we don't have a sort of outreach resource for citizens who might be having challenges on their property managing their trees. Instead, we direct, if you will, or suggest that citizens, property owners seek their own arborist service in order to help guide them on decision-making about how to manage trees on their property. So that is one area that the city does not have professional services that would be, so if you dropped into the city and you needed somebody to help assess blight or a laminate root rot or a problem with your trees and make recommendations on management practices, we do not have that service as a city.
Well, that goes back to John's comment that potentially, if that position is available, can handle some of the city's project, or the money would come from a general fund to help the Park and Rec for their operation. So it's not only from the development side, from the city-owned projects.
I'd like to, we've talked about the arborist for a little while, so we can determine if we want to make that recommendation or not. We know there's budget challenges and so forth. We should focus on any other amendments that we'd like to recommend to the update here. So anybody else have anything that you heard from public comments, public hearing, that makes sense to perhaps adjust? Otherwise, we would make a change to the amendment that you made to accept the whole document as proposed.
Chair, if I could add one thing. So in my review of the document just here in the last bit, I do notice that there is a Scrivener's error that persists through the document that was identified by the speaker earlier, and we will definitely be cleaning that up prior to transmittal. So one of your items could be to correct the Scrivener's errors prior to transmittal to the council, and that would then we could get in there and correct those.
We'll definitely do that. There's some formatting and highlights and so forth that show up in there. So, so if not, there's at least one that I'd like to raise. And I don't know the best way to do this because when I was thinking through this, and amendments would be pretty specific. But with some of the comments, I think there's a little bit of research or study that's needed. And specifically, I do want to address things around injection, underground injection, and the protection of our groundwater, which, if there are instances in here that raises risks, and Councilmember Treen mentioned about the commercial repair and servicing centers, and I've seen in other places where that it can get actually pretty messy, or any kind of infiltration of things like the forever chemicals. And it wasn't clear to me, and I went back and looked at this just after some of the public comments, how clear those protections would be. So for example, with the vehicle repair and servicing, are there regular audits that are done of a repair center? Because it says there's certainly certain requirements. Do we know that they're following those requirements? Because if not, there will be infiltration potentially into the groundwater.
Could you please let me know which page of the document you're on?
It would be on the packet we had, page 46 of 453. So requirements.
This is in the table.
Requirements for specific uses and activities, number 7. I'd have to look back to see which section that is, but. So this was the agenda packet that. So I'm not sure if you're looking at exactly the same thing or not. But well, let me before you look at that. So the question is I thought we might make specific amendments that say, oh, change this or add this. Instead, I'm thinking there needs to be and I don't know if it's a recommendation or actually an amendment to potentially change some of the text beyond the formatting and so forth. Do you want to take a look? Yeah, that's one instance. But the main thing is around the infiltration to our groundwater and protecting groundwater, and how clear the code is to ensure that we don't have any of the nasty chemicals, petrochemicals, forever chemicals that would go into our groundwater.
So I will add that both of our water providers that provide water that is extracted from the ground by way of wells have been a partner in creating these rules and have given us direct feedback and red lines and edits, and they have provided that what they have provided is adequate to protect the water that they are providing the city. They are the ones that ultimately are responsible for water quality of water that's being provided, and their review, and they're actually, I don't want to be overzealous in saying this, but they were very grateful and appreciative of all of the opportunity for them to literally get in and write the rules regarding what can be done in a critical aquifer recharge area. So what you're seeing here has been thoroughly reviewed by our water purveyors and has been I'm not quoting them, but in my understanding and conclusion has been determined to be adequate to protect the water resource. Now, if you want us to go back to them and to maybe it is to get verification from the water service providers that the protections that are included in our critical areas rules are adequate for to ensure the protection against undesirable chemicals, unwanted chemicals, forever chemicals, or other toxins that could enter our water supply. Because at the end of the day, we could speculate on all the things we would want to do. We're not the hydrogeologists that understand how the whole thing works. So that's where I would go to for my information.
That's a great point. Thank you. Okay. So that was the only other one I had, and I don't think anybody else had made.
Mike, I want to second what Mike said about the comments made by Councilmember Treen, and those are the ones I was going to bring up. And I'm not sure if we have the time, if I can go back to the recording tomorrow so I can write them. Unfortunately, I did not write them and send them back to you in a written way, because I agree with more than two of the ones that they mentioned up there. So, and I believe they are very good points that we need to include them. Two of them are the ones that Mike just mentioned, but I believe there are more. And I don't want to slow down your process.
So is that a separate motion?
I don't want to miss them
is that
too.
a separate motion or inclusion of the motion?
Well, we should make, as best we can this evening, make recommendations or amendments. And an amendment could be like the verification.
Yeah.
So, the motion that we have on the table, that you said was to approve with some changes. Those changes will be amendments. One amendment will be around formatting and typos and so forth. That's an easy one. We'll vote on that and all that, right? Another one could be around the verification, in terms of the safety of the water supply. And then if there are some other concerns that we have, we could also state them perhaps as an additional, verification, or to, do an additional check and review. Because otherwise, if I understand our process, what we would do is then want to, if we don't make those recommendations, to send this to council with amendments, perhaps with verifications, then we would be asking to see this again, which would stretch out the whole process. And I think there's ways to accomplish this without stretching it out, without us having to see it again.
I also want to highlight for the commission that this being an update, that much of the text that was discussed by some of the commenters this evening is from the existing rules that were in place prior to our starting this process. That's not to say that amendments shouldn't include striking things that aren't appropriate, but I do want to highlight that specific fee in lieu component related to town center development was a prior existing regulation that is already on the books.
That's another one that I agree with them. We should not allow developers to pay money because they will buy it. If you say $1 million, they will buy it. So those are the things I wanted to go back to and send them, because they would just pay it.
So there's a couple options. To round it up, Or, if it's necessary and the commission is not able to bring this to closure, to continue it to another night.
And there's also, the council will be reviewing, and there'll be public comment with the council as
I can
well.
come to the council, to the city
So-
council, and just bring them up there as a public comment then.
Yeah. Because otherwise, like for the town center one, that point is well taken in terms of that was not part of the scope of the update. Still a concern. So what I think I'd like to do is to do a motion for the verification with a second. And then we would vote on that. The same thing around the formats, vote on that. So any amendments we have to the
Take one by
original
one.
motion, we need to vote on. That's Robert's rules. And then determine if there's anything else. And then we'll do a quick review of the recommendations that we are having so that we can form the letter to council. Okay, so let's do the easy one first. So I'd look for a motion to amend related to the formatting. And I'll jot that down, and then we'll see if we have a second and vote.
So moved.
I second.
Okay, I'll write down whatever I said. All right, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, one down. So, and then the second, if somebody could come up with the words around the verification for groundwater. So a motion for,
Okay, I'll take a crack at it. Recommend that staff seek verification from our water purveyors in the city regarding injection well safety and hazardous materials such as auto services to make sure that our well water is fully protected, particularly from forever chemicals.
Chair, can I add one more clause to that?
Go for it.
And also to see the impact of the injections into the water table for the city.
I think that would be a separate one, because this one's talking about the contamination.
So that'll be a
versus-
separate one.
If that, and that, yeah.
Okay, got it.
It feels significantly different from the protection of the water from chemicals. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? I should do that. That's Robert's rules. No further discussion. So we'll do a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Motion carries unanimously. All right. So we've got 2 amendments to the original motion. Any other amendments? Or maybe a recommendation?
So I'd like to propose a recommendation to do an analysis on the impact of the injections on the water table for the city.
Okay. All right. We'll come back to recommendations in a moment. We'll just lump all those together. Any other amendments to the original? Okay. So now we can go back to the original motion, which had been seconded. And with the amendments that we've made to that motion, would there be any further discussion? So we have original motion that says we accept with the following. The following are these 2 amendments that we're recommending, that we're making. Any other discussion? Hearing none. So all in favor of the original motion that said made, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we've got that completed. The recommendations that we talked about were the corridor maps, the arborist, and that would.
Subject to availability of the funding in 25.
Correct. We'll in the letter to council, we'll recognize the budget implications and so forth, but, recommend that there be consideration or study or whatever the best words would be. Study sounds like a bad word these days, but not quite a report. And then, Ajay, you just mentioned about to analyze for
Yeah,
injection
analyze the
impact.
impact to the water table due to the injection wells.
Any discussion on that?
And I'd like to explain that for a second and then see if it isn't. So as we have injection wells and people go in, it has an impact on the water table of the city. The water table of the city would be, I'm just going to throw it out here. If we were to say that we can find water, clean, potable water, five yards down from the ground, and if we were to allow injections as it goes, if you check that in another 5 years, it'll no longer be 5 yards. It'll actually be 15 yards because there has been injections and the water has been depleted at that 5-yard level and gone down to 15 yards. So at a minimum, what we would do is that we would say that here is where the water table stands. For you to get clean potable water, you need to dig in to this level, and that if there is an impact. Sorry?
Create a baseline.
Create a baseline, exactly. So that will inform if you want to do more. And the city may come back, the staff may say that we will probably allow only 20 of these wells to happen, and if there are more than 20, it'll be some study and so on and so forth. But keeping that is important. Otherwise, we are going to find ourselves in a place where the water table goes significantly down and down as we move forward.
So as you were talking, frankly, my initial reaction was you're talking about the amount of aquifer that we have, which isn't necessarily directly related to the critical areas update. And then when you tied it into injection like that, perhaps. So let me look to staff, and this feels like it might be important, but not related to this particular subject.
Right.
So,
well, it's my understanding that the water purveyors, as stakeholders, are taking one more look at this, particularly with the questions that have come up today on critical aquifer recharge areas. But from discussion that we've had to date for this CAO update, it's my understanding that they collect a lot of monitoring and baseline data, so it'd be good to see how close they come or if they have the type of assessment that you're speaking of. And then in terms of depths, I think that the depth varies quite a bit depending on geologic conditions, on a site-specific basis. Depth to aquifer can be variable based on geologic conditions, but we can certainly speak to them.
Yeah, I also want to clarify that, and I hope I'm getting this right, but that injection wells really are, it's an interesting thing because an injection well is something that is wider than it is deep. And that is simply the definition. So the challenge is, or is it deeper than it is wide? Deeper than it is wide. Yeah, the opposite. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought.
Yeah. The challenge is that these are usually surficial facilities, if you will. It's like an infiltration galley where they might dig down 8 feet and put in some rock that's wrapped in a filter fabric. And the purpose of these is to put water into the ground. So I want to make sure that when we're talking about this, that generally, I mean, my perception is the inverse of this, is that the more injection wells you get, the more groundwater you're going to have, because the more water that's being put directly into the ground, as opposed to being left to flow across the surface. So we'd be happy to work with them. The place where this information is found is in the water district's water comprehensive plans, where they have extensive information on their modeling around, and considered with the modeling is surface development, are patterns and changes that are happening. So they have their consultants, when they create their water comprehensive plans, forecast out the level of water and whether or not the well will be adequate to provide for the duration of the comprehensive plan and where their backup wells are located, et cetera, et cetera. So they have some of this information already available, and we'd be happy to engage them. Every time I talk to them, I learn more about how their water systems work.
Yeah, I totally understand, and thank you for the clarification on the inverse. Yes, that's true. An injection well is where we inject water into the well and not like suck water out of the well. But it's still water that is that has an impact on the water table is where I'm coming to. And I have a feeling that will actually end up lowering the water table or taking it down more than it'll bring it back up. I understand that, we'll have better water there, but then at the surface level, but then it likely would have that impact. And at least if we could study to find that out, that'll be good to do that. And that's what I'm trying to recommend over here.
If I may.
Jay, can I make a suggestion here? Since none of us are experts, that we ask staff to engage with Sam Platt and other water providers. The next year, we could get a presentation from them on how our water system works, and then we can ask questions at that time of the experts.
Yes, totally. And just to background, I'm ready to offer help because I grew up in a city where we were just getting injection, but we were actually sucking water out. And as we did that in a city in southern India, the water table just kept going crashing down, right? And it did this one. Injections happen, but if injections happen, that did not change the fact that there was impact because of the well. And that's what I'm trying to bring up as we are working on it. So yes, totally, like Commissioner John says, we can work on that, and I'll be happy to help if there's any discussion.
Let's do a quick, in terms of the recommendations, I don't think we need a formal motion and seconds and all this, but just to get a sense of what we should put into the.
But my motion included 2 items. You only covered 1 item. One was wildlife corridor. The other one was the hiring and arborists. And I heard from staff that we can use the same language consideration for both, for hiring an arborist and also creation of the wildlife corridor. You mentioned only one, the wildlife corridor.
I was going to talk about the arborist as well.
Okay.
Before you go, can I make a motion to extend by 15 minutes?
15, we have another presentation.
Yeah.
Make a motion to extend longer than that.
Okay. By 1 hour.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We'll go through 9:30. So I was just going to ask of body of the lodge kind of thing, those who would support, including in our letter to council, a recommendation to fund the creation of corridor maps. Is that something? I see thumbs up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, we'll include that. Yep. The next one is around the arborists and whether we would make the same kind of recommendation for a consideration to put in an arborist in the next biennium's budget. Thumbs up, thumbs down. I would have a down on that. Yeah. Given the budget, yeah.
I would go with the up. I would go and double check how much money are we spending on consultants now and compare that to hiring a full-time staff.
And also the consultants, not only for the development consultants, that the Park and Rec
for
pay
everything
for it.
we do
Yeah.
as a city.
Okay. We could work some wording around that, right? Okay.
How many votes did you get, though?
It was, so there were, 2, 3 that were in favor, others not. So we were split, but with that recommendation to say, let's do that check. We could put that in, and then council could decide. That's part of what council does.
The public brought to our attention several times over several meetings.
Yeah.
So let's just do the study and see if it makes sense.
And let the council make the call.
Right, and then there would be that data to share with public. So that's a great point.
So
Okay.
kind of summarize this. There are 4 items on that motion.
When we make motions after public hearings, there's a letter that goes to council with basically the recommendation or the finding. That letter, modeled after others that we've done, will be around the motion. So there was an initial motion to accept the the update with the following, and the following were the two additional motions. One was around the verification, and what was the other one?
Why can't,
The
why,
injection.
why can't we combine it into one motion?
Well, that's just
To
Robert's
include
rules.
four.
Huh?
To include four. Two that I made and two additional that we just discussed.
Well, those will be recommendations.
Okay.
But what, and if you'd like, we could forward the letter that we're preparing for
Okay.
council to you. I think I understand what you're saying. All of those four,
Easier when the council reads that these are the amendment that we make to the motion.
yeah, I think they'll be clear. I mean, and the way I've seen these written before, when we've had discussions like that, it's clear what we're suggesting, or what we're recommending to council. So, but if you like, we could forward that before we do a final signature and send it off. Okay, so we have another topic. And that is the preliminary draft of the TMP.
So did we do it? Did we do an official vote on the motion?
We did.
We did. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
We're all
Wonderful.
motioned out.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And we'll see you on the next round of code updates.
Okay.
We want to take a break?
Anybody need a 5-minute break? We need to transition staff anyway.
Oh, do you? Okay. Well, then we'll be back in 5 minutes. Let's actually make it 8:40.
Do you have time?
It's our designated restart time. Greg, Lindsay, you're out there. Let's see if we could hear you.
Hopefully you could hear me.
Yeah, I saw your mouth move. I didn't hear you.
Uh-oh. Can you? I'm okay?
Better now.
Okay. Oh, all right. Well,
Yeah,
you did a recess right at the right time because right when that came up, I had to my camera wasn't working at that point. So yeah, a second. Uh-oh. All right.
I will, and Greg, unless you're going to do this, but just in terms of what we're looking for. So this is a overview of really what we're going to be doing coming up in the next couple of weeks, because we'll have the opportunity to, with however you pronounce that software, to go through and make detailed comments on the transportation master plan. So obviously any questions for clarification, those kind of things, but when it comes down to more detailed kind of comments, we'll have an opportunity to do that online on the, on the master plan itself. So, and Greg, I don't know if I stole your thunder or not, or you can repeat and be more clear about that, but in terms of our purpose here. Okay,
no problem.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Greg Stamatillo. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Works for Sammamish. I'm joined by Lindsay Channing, Transportation Planner on our Public Works staff. I'd like to start by acknowledging the work of Lindsay and DKS, our consultants who have done all the heavy lifting to create this draft Transportation Master Plan. We are both quite excited to be presenting the Transportation Master Plan, also known as the TMP draft today. The TMP will be made available for you and the public hopefully tomorrow is our intent, and Lindsay will detail that later in the presentation. This presentation is not the starting point, but the next starting point is what I'd like to characterize as an important public discussion on what is the future for transportation in Sammamish. A reminder that the TMP is an active document. We have more work to do this year, and we'll have more work to do next year, and Lindsay will also detail that. And that the TMP will continuously be updated as we need to meet the needs of Sammamish's transportation goals. The key thing that we are here today is to help give you a strong framework of the items you will need to know when reviewing this plan, and that will lead you towards a pathway of successful engagement for commenting on the TMP. So the items that we'll see and discuss today is how the TMP connects with the city's comprehensive plan. What are the differences between this update compared to our update in 2025? How the TMP is important to the city. We'll preview the chapters and what is in those, and we'll discuss where we are currently and where we are currently and where we're going for the rest of 24 to get this approved. Next slide, Lindsay. There we go. So to achieve Sammamish's vision, transportation goals, and policies, the transportation element is the city's comprehensive plan. Of the city's comprehensive plan serves as the foundation for our first TMP. The biggest components of this, and this is the way I myself find it easiest to characterize these two components of the transportation element, I characterize as the what, and the TMP is the how. So the transportation element gives you the visions, the goals, and the policies, and the transportation master plan itself, the how, gives you the plans, the projects, and the strategies of how to pay for them, how to build them, and how to execute the actual work itself. So now I'm going to turn over the rest of the presentation to our transportation master plan staff lead, Lindsay Channing. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Good evening, planning commissioners. So I'd like to you all have seen this slide before. It was in a previous presentation, but I think it's a really important one, and I want to make sure that there isn't confusion around this. So our current comprehensive plan for the city, it was completed in 2015 with a couple updates through the years, but it's considered the 2015 comprehensive plan, and that's our current one because that's what we have adopted. And within that, the various chapters in volume 1 include goals and policies for each of those chapters. Volume 2 are associated with each of those chapters, and those are considered the background chapters. So that's where you get more of the data, supporting information, the compliance with the Growth Management Act, and things like that. So specifically to transportation, there's a Transportation Volume 1, which is our goals and policies, and a Transportation Element Volume 2, the background chapter. Moving forward, we're changing that up a little bit, where the transportation element will remain as Volume 1 and will include our goals and policies on what we want things to look like, as Greg was making his analogy there. And Volume 2 will become a dynamic reference or a dynamic link. So instead of having all that background information as Volume 2, we'll have a very short summary statement with the dynamic link to the Transportation Master Plan. This is consistent with a lot of our neighboring jurisdictions on how they've been moving forward with this. This is the way other elements of our comprehensive plan today operate, such as the parks element. They have a Volume 1 with the goals and policies, and then the Volume 2 references to their parks pros plan. So within the TMP that we're currently drafting and working on, it will be more comprehensive. So it will be including all modes of transportation throughout the city, have considerations for potential funding to maintain and improve transportation. Of course, the portions of that TMP that are meeting our Growth Management Act will be in there and compliant. And then it also allows for certain areas of our Transportation Master Plan to be updated outside of a comprehensive plan cycle. So what's the significance of a TMP? Well, for us, the TMP is that how we plan for the future, how we move forward with our transportation vision as a multimodal community. So incorporating not only vehicle transportation, but transit, pedestrian, and bicyclists. It should reflect the community's input. It also is a document, as I mentioned previously, that is going to actually implement the goals and policies of our Volume 1 transportation element and our comprehensive plan. And also needs to, of course, align with all of our other city plans that we have for the city, ones that currently exist and ones that will exist in the future. And that's why it's really important that we're able to update the TMP on a regular basis. It's not meant to be a stagnant document, and we want to keep it current as we move forward. And then also, it's really that strategic framework to help us with our decisions and what investments we make as a community for our transportation needs moving forward over the next 20-year planning horizon. It will also include prioritized lists of projects, programs, and strategies. And we want it to have full transparency. So as we've discussed previously, leading up to this night, this is our first Transportation Master Plan, and we're very excited to be moving in this direction. To that end, this is setting the framework for how we envision our Transportation Master Plan to function and operate moving forward. But we acknowledge that there's room for improvement, and we won't be able to accomplish maybe everything that we want in this first go around. And that's why we're doing an update in 2025 as well. And I'll get into more details around that here momentarily. But this first Transportation Master Plan will be adopted by the end of the year. The first draft that we will be releasing tomorrow is the majority of it is in a textual format, meaning it's not heavily filled with graphics. We do have maps and figures in it, but we have more that we're working on. So that is not complete at this stage. We're anticipating those will be included in future drafts. I also want to point out that the project lists are not currently in this draft, as that is another element that we're still working on and will be added in future drafts. Again, you may find some figure numbers that still need to be updated or question marks because we haven't done all of the correct referencing back. Because this is a working document that's moving, has lots of moving pieces, it really makes, from a time perspective, the most sense to not continue to chase our tail, if you will, constantly changing those as we're incorporating more figures. So We do have that on our list, acknowledging that that is something that still you may find errors or needs to be included in the document. Going into 2025, I'll get into this in a moment, but we are going to be conducting a bike and pedestrian plan. So that will be incorporated, that detailed information will be incorporated. Any corridor studies that have been completed for our road systems, those will be incorporated in the 2025 update. Again, we'll be further refining our project lists. And the TMP is something that we will be updating on a fairly consistent basis every couple of years or ad hoc as needed. So we, as staff, has been very busy, as all other departments, as well as you've seen many different planning documents and code regulation changes coming before you for your input. So to finish out 2024, we'll get this first transportation master plan completed, and then we'll be moving right into that update. That will include more detailed information as we're working on our transit enhancement study. The bike and pedestrian mobility strategic plan is something that we're hoping to kick off in Q4 of this year. We're really excited about that because it's really going to help fine-tune some new methodologies that I'll be discussing later in this presentation, and also have a much more in-depth and impactful project assessment of our needs and recommendations to be more multimodal friendly. We'll also be working on a pavement management strategic plan. And then as a citywide perspective, impact fees are going to be addressed in 2025 as well. And one of the impact fees that are going to be looked at and updated will be traffic impact fees. So as you can see, there's a lot of moving parts that we, as we move forward as a city, will need to continually update and include in our transportation master plan. So with that, I'd like to very briefly go over the chapters. This was included in your agenda packets for this evening. This is a more succinct illustration of that. And I am going to spend time on one topic from chapter 2 that I really think is the largest change and the newest strategy that I'd like to spend a little bit of time on to help folks understand. So our executive summary is just that, discusses the framework for the TMP and really is an outline of what the reader will be encountering throughout the document. The one thing that I want to point out with the executive summary, I think, is really the most beneficial, especially for a staff perspective, as I talked about needing to update and wanting to update the Transportation Master Plan. There are portions within this plan that have to meet Growth Management Act compliance in conjunction with our comprehensive plan element, the transportation element. And so within the executive summary, we'll have a very long checklist. I just have a snapshot of it here on the screen as an example, where as we meet those requirements, we will be able to reference the page or the policy, the section, if you will, of this transportation master plan document that pertains to, so we can easily and transparently outline what is a GMA compliance portion of this plan and will require us to take a different process to update it than the portions that we could just as needed update. The introduction, chapter 1, is really the planning context and sets the tone for how we plan on shaping our future mobility needs for the city. Chapter 2 is the transportation inventory and existing conditions chapter. So of course, there's an assessment of the existing traffic conditions within our city and adjacent to it. So we've gathered data, primarily our own from the city, from King County, and from the Washington State Department of Transportation. The new sections that I'm going to dive into here on the next few slides have to do with a multimodal level of service and the level of traffic stress. So we have a level of service standard in the city that we've had for quite some time, and that's our intersection level of service standards. That's for vehicular traffic. The multimodal level of service is meant to incorporate various modes of transportation. So our intersection level of service is one of those, and that already exists in our code, and we're not proposing any changes to that. It also is the basis for our concurrency program and is a requirement for concurrency determinations. Our transit level of service guidelines was something that first rolled out with our transit plan that we did earlier this year and in 2023. And that is more of a guideline, as the text tells you here. So it does not apply to our concurrency requirements. And the way that we're looking at that level of service guidelines is around things that we can control, because we don't operate the transit system for the city. So things that we can control is access to transit stops, proximity with sidewalks, things of that nature, bike receptacles, the rider comfort while they're waiting to catch a bus, for instance. And then the last level of service guideline, which is the newest one that we're proposing through this, is the bike and pedestrian level of service guidelines. They'll be focused on a level of traffic stress. This is a strategy that's pretty well received in the transportation community. Some of our neighboring jurisdictions are starting to adopt the same type of level of service guidelines using the traffic stress model. It would only apply to our principal, collector, and minor arterials. And it's really important to point out that when you meet a level of service for bike and pedestrian guideline, it's a goal and not a requirement. So again, this one also will not be applying to our concurrency requirements. This colorful image here is one that's you'll see, I think, popping up more and more in jurisdiction planning documents, because it's really an easily understood illustration of the LTS model. It's a comfort-based ranking system from a scale of 1 to 4, where 1 is the most comfortable and 4 is the least comfortable. And this would apply both to pedestrian and bicyclists, even though this image only shows bicycles. So level 1 is an interested but concerned. So this is where you would see most children accompanied by adults would feel comfortable and safe riding, maybe walking with a stroller and pets, things of that nature. And then the LTS 4 is known as the strong and fearless. And this is where you have to be very comfortable riding in a mixed traffic environment. So on the shoulder of a road and traversing with traffic. So to get in more into what a level of traffic stress is and how it can be implemented. This graphic is just one illustration. This is not the only way to achieve this. There's lots of implementation strategies that can be used. You see here, for instance, on the far left of the screen, or excuse me, the far right of the screen, the LTS1, the green stripes. That's protected barriers between the travel lanes for vehicles and for pedestrian and bicyclists. So they have their own separated lane. But other ways that traffic stress can be implemented is through things such as vehicle speed control, how many travel lanes exist on the roadway, landscaping features that also can be utilized using shared paths and trails. So it doesn't always have to be a paved sidewalk or pathway, and then widths of the bike lanes and sidewalks. So from a planning level, how are we start implementing these into our projects? Well, we're starting with it in our transportation master plan. It'll be further refined as we move into work with our bike and pedestrian plan, and then updated to reflect that further refinement when we update our transportation master plan next year. It's already being looked at with our corridor study, specifically with our Sahali Way corridor study that's currently underway. And then we also have the options of using complete streets and multimodal road design and development standards. While we don't have a complete streets ordinance yet for the city, that is something that we're looking at potentially moving forward with in the next planning cycle. So moving on to Chapter 3, Future Conditions. This one focuses for the future planning horizon. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan, which is a 20-year look ahead. So
The future planning horizon is to the year 2044. And again, it covers all modes of transportation. 4 outlines the public engagement to date and what we've heard and the issues and opportunities the community feels are most important. This public engagement has been through numerous iterations of work towards getting a transportation master plan for the city, tabling at numerous city events such as the block party that we had last September, farmers markets, and open houses with other projects and plans we've been working on. Chapter 5 is the Future Transportation Vision chapter. This is really setting the framework for how we're going to do our investments into our transportation system for the next 20 years. And then this is where we get into the goals and policies of the transportation element, what our strategies are to implement them. And then chapter 6, our last chapter, is the plan implementation. And this is more the financial side of things, and our actual projects. So while we don't have the project lists in this first draft that you'll be seeing starting tomorrow, that's where it will live. It also talks about numerous funding sources that could potentially be used in the future to help fund transportation efforts, things like the Transportation Benefit District, debt financing, and partnerships or budget appropriations. So what's next? So tonight is this presentation. Again, tomorrow I will be releasing the draft for Planning Commission review and public review. And then we'll be coming back to Planning Commission with a public hearing in August, at the end of August. And then taking that forward to City Council in the fall for work sessions and a public hearing, and then adoption in December. The Transportation Master Plan will need to be adopted prior to the Transportation Master Plan will need to be adopted by City Council prior to them adopting our comprehensive plan, because it does include some of the background information that is a requirement of the comprehensive plan for the transportation element. So as was alluded to by the chair this evening, we're asking Planning Commission to review through Convio, which is something I think the Planning Commission is well versed in at this point with their numerous reviews of our current comprehensive plan draft. So you'll be receiving an email from myself tomorrow. That will have the link password for access. We're asking that your review of this draft be submitted by 9. Take your comments into consideration and address them, implement them, or include them as part of the conversation and discussion for the public hearing at the end of August. And then community members will be able to access the PDF document of this first TMP draft on our city website at the link provided here on the screen. We'll also make sure that it gets put out on our social media outlets and anyone that's signed up for the public notice type email list, that people get notified that this is now available for community review. So the second draft of our Transportation Master Plan will be released prior to the Planning Commission public hearing. Again, that is scheduled for the end of August. And with that, that is staff's overview of what to expect on this first draft of the Transportation Master Plan. And Greg and I are available for any questions that you may have of us. Thank you.
Okay, Lindsay, thank you, and Greg. I think that sets us up well. Gosh, the only comment I can make as a cyclist, I don't know if I like the strong and fearless. That there needs to be another, like, confident, something like that. But
industry standard. We didn't come up with.
I was actually. That's good. I don't know. We'll take it at that. So, other commissioners, are there more serious comments and questions in that one? Yes, go ahead, please.
Really quick question. How is level of traffic stress measured? Is it a quantitative measurement or more of a subjective measurement?
Chair, I'm sorry, we can't quite hear the
Oh, yeah.
speaker. If we could come a
I
little
think
closer to the
I think he asked, how do we measure level of stress?
Yes, that's correct. So is it like quantitative measurement or subjective measurement?
I believe it's subjective, correct, Lindsay?
measuring the level of traffic stress. I believe it's somewhat subjective, although there are guidelines that our transportation consultant, DKS, is putting together for us that has become an industry standard that they're aware of. Part of measuring that, it goes back to that graphic that was shown on the screen on that slide of how pedestrians and bicyclists are separated from the travel lanes of vehicles, cars and buses.
Whether it's some are a bike lane, some are a bike lane with a divider, some are separated complete trail, multi-paths as well. So those level of standards help define it, but there is a little bit of ambiguity to who is fearless or not.
Others?
Let me follow up on that question. As you probably know, that the region has a Cascade Bicycle Club. Are you contacted them and kind of get their feedback as far as these ratings? Probably they can help you in respect to Huang's question that if it is subjective or not, you can actually benefit from some conversation with the Cascade Bicycle Club.
We're happy to reach out to them.
Also, early on, we had a meeting with you all. I had to go over my comments, but I brought up the issue of maybe additional public involvement, taking advantage of the farmers market now that you have some document that you can show to the public and let the people react to it. Is that something that you can do? Have some kiosk at the weekly farmers market?
We could explore that. We've done similar outreach in the past.
But in the past, you didn't have a plan. Now the plan is
understood.
Another idea that you may want to kind of consider to get more feedback from the community.
It's a good suggestion.
Other comments, questions? John?
So I like the idea of the stress test, and in fact, this evening, if you were commuting from the south part of the city, you would have seen it as hundreds of people streamed towards Pine Lake Park for the music in the park and during rush hour. So, good luck.
I have a more logistical question. Like, do I need to have a user ID and password for that, the new software?
Yes.
Oh.
They'll send it to you.
Okay. I might have missed it already. One more question, Lindsay. When we're doing this transportation plan or the transit plan, are we looking at the public transportation of like what's the frequency of buses we're getting at the Sammamish Park and Ride?
Sorry, I only caught part of that on my end. Greg, were you able to hear the question?
Yeah, she was asking if the level of service for Metro's service is provided. The current level of service is provided in there. The headway is the service is going to be changing with the next service change in September of this year. Yeah.
Okay.
So it currently showed 30-minute headways in the 269 route that comes up Sahali Way. 228 is going to cutting that in half, so 15-minute headways, which is very, very good transit service. All the other service that Metro is providing, including Metro Flex and Van Share, are all remaining the same at present.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Ajay, anything else? No? Okay. Hey, maybe a little brief clarification. I understand that we need to, make comments and so forth. I'm looking for just some guidance, I guess. Since this is still in draft form, and there will be, additions and so forth, and I understand about figure numbers and illustrations and all of that. But there's also elements of the transportation master plan that will get updated actually next year. So I guess as I'm reading in, there'll be parts of in the table of contents or whatever that's covered that we need to comment on, make edits, so forth. If there are missing elements, things that you mentioned that will be covered next year, the bicycle and pedestrian piece would be an example of that. Should we ignore those, make any kind of notes? What would you like to see from us?
I'd recommend that you still review them because it is setting the framework. I just wanted to make sure that there was an understanding that the level of detail that's included in the 2024 TMP is not as detailed as we're anticipating with that update for 2025 once the bicycle and pedestrian plan has been completed. But if there are other things that you think that we may have missed that should be included in a transportation master plan, please include that type of general comment that's helpful for us. Or if something you're reading is completely unclear, that's also helpful for us to know. We want this to be a document that while it does have a technical basis, it's something that a community member would be able to pick up and follow. And so if there are portions that are very technical or not worded in a way that's clear to understand, we would like to know that as well.
Okay, great. I don't have any other comments. So very helpful. So we have an assignment to, by the 8th, get comments back to you. And with that, we still have one other thing, maybe two, if we have any further like updates from directors or the calendar, but public comment. Yeah. So any further public comments? Paul, you're very patient.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Good job on the critical area ordinance. I'm going to go back for a minute to a 1970s or 80s TV commercial. Where's the beef? Now, where's the land use in this? It guides everything. Now, I'm not going to go radically off base at all, but a TMP that plans for the next 20 years of 2,000 affordable only houses is one thing. That if you take a real strict look at the comprehensive plan and what's been said recently at meetings, is this on? The sound? Okay. Oh yeah. You can knock me down. I'm not going to take all that. That would lead to one thing. If Sammamish would have taken a tack to say there is going to be no growth at all, which was tried back in 2020, but that didn't pass muster, that would be something else. If you go with what I'm proposing, it would be something else. If you look at a long term beyond that, it would be something else. So my recommendation is to not put a strong line in the sand for the 20-year land use yet. Put a strong line in the sand for what's needed today for sure, and then have some preliminary work for a potential of only 2,000 housing units. But, not to repeat a ton of what I've said, I'll just make a real brief comment here. If you added market rate housing at a ratio of roughly 85 to 15, and if you talked about the numbers I'm talking about, you'd end up over a 20-year period with about 5,000 market rate houses and 1,000 affordable. If you are successful on your religious and civic sites on the bonus and maybe get 500, I think that's a real workable scenario, especially keeping most of that development in centers in less in the neighborhoods, but that's a different path. So what's the path? I don't expect that answer. I believe it's unsettled. I believe there are multiple things, dimensions in play. And I've been talking to a Sammamish resident quite a bit about this. He'll probably be coming in to talk to you on his own, so I'm not going to mention a name. But he's a consultant that deals with companies to focus on real issues rather than periphery. And he gave me an example that has stuck in my brain, and it's 2 words, bike sheds. And he had a company who, instead of dealing with the things they really needed to do to fix their company, they all rallied behind creating bike sheds for the company, and they all got behind it. And that was great, but it didn't solve the problems for the company. So the question is, which land use really brings the most low impact, net positive benefit in ways in the future? So my comment on the TMP is focus more on today and leave a placeholder for potential change as long-term land use. The thing I'm hoping to achieve is to share and demonstrate a common cause. I don't run for any offices because I believe this issue is like the national defense at our country. It survives all ideologies. You know, Republicans or Democrats or independents don't get rid of the national defense. Well, what I know is we're way the heck out of balance on our housing. And what I'm talking about is, I'm not going to say it's a drop in the bucket. It's significant, but it's a small step to reaching it. It's not what's needed. And I'm going to leave a handout of something that I like here about addressing, instead of talking about instead of avoiding the biggest issue in the room, I think it's time to get data, compare outcomes and consequences, and that will inform the direction of the TMP. It'll inform critical areas. It'll inform the comp plan. It'll inform the budget. It'll have radical differences on transit. If you get the right size that meets community needs in centers, then you can have internal and regional transit that's far more effective. But the thing I'm going to leave you is a quote from Nelson Mandela. It's never too late to do the right thing. And a quote from Martin Luther King, similar. The time is always right to do what's right. It's not right to avoid authentic facts. It's not right to avoid genuine needs. It's not right to contrast consequences of meeting those needs. It's not right to really have people understand the holistic nature of this decision, because what we have is 85% King County, for goodness sakes. We didn't create what we have. King County did. And the housing that Sammamish built over the last 15 to 20 years was 85% single family. I'm just saying, because I've been in real estate for over 40 years, we're further out of balance than any other city our size, and I'm not trying to get us all the way to meet everybody. I'm just trying to start to alleviate major imbalance with a modest step over the next 10 years rather than potentially postponing that for 10 years. Anyway, I've got my little handout.
Thank you, Paul. I thought you were going to bring a hamburger to go with the, with the ketchup. We get part of it.
Not a plug for Costco. They sell 3 of these for $8. A Whole Foods wants $8 for one. And it's good ketchup. It's healthy.
But you have to write the plus.
Yeah. Mary, you going to make a comment? Figured you were waiting here for a purpose. So.
The Mary Wichter, Sammamish. I think maybe the best thing to do is to try to put the TMP in line with critical areas. You have a lot of projects that are on the TMPs that can be done. I'll use Sahali as an example. They looked at doing Sahali I don't know, back in 2015 when I started coming in, it was going to be $14.6 million to do a project. And then people said it's kind of like lipstick on a pig. Unless you really fix it, you're just spending money and we're not really getting anything out of it. The development patterns are Sahali was in 1970 and 74 had 2 developers, and like the homes are all off, so there aren't a lot of connection streets to it, so you can drive, I think, the 45 mile an hour speed limit. So they're looking at Sahali again, and one of the things I think they're doing with Petite again is they're saying, well, we're looking at all the options, just like they did with Lewis Thompson. They came up with 4 different options that you could look at for doing the road, with sidewalks on both sides, the planter strip, and you can't really do that. I don't know why we look at that many options, because with the critical areas like Sahali, they had a big landslide there in 1982. I don't know if you've seen the picture. And they've had landslides in Evans Creek Park Preserve, which they've had to fix. And we've had landslides, 9 of them around where I live. I don't think we can just keep doing things assuming that it's standard complete streets where you have the sea of asphalt and the 2 sidewalks. And like even the separated bike lane is a good idea, but we just don't have the width here because we are on a plateau. It's about 500 feet above sea level, drops down to about 30 feet pretty quickly at Lake Sammamish Park. At Lake Sammamish. And so like I live in the area this way, and you just can't fit it there. So I think we need to think a lot more carefully about our connectivity. Like I was glad to see that bicycle and pedestrian things, because there's places you can't ride up, and some of the properties that they've bought have really steep hills, and how do you do the trails through there? And the thing that never gets mapped is the stormwater ponds. There used to be about 455. I think there's over 500 now. We know where all those are. They should be mapped because those are actually public properties. And if we get the big earthquake or the big wildfire and we need to walk places, I think you could connect through there. I think wildlife does connect through there. I think you could have bike paths and things. So I think we need to look at our city differently than complete streets. The other thing that complete streets does is if you have the pavement and then the sidewalk, people see this really big sea of asphalt that they can speed really fast on, and they do. And even the little e-bikes and stuff go fast. So if you listen to Strong Towns and some of the things they do, like by a library, they actually narrow the street, or they put in those little traffic calming devices that are circles, or the sticks in the road, which are called chicanes. So I think we really need to think about, how do we live? How does the land tell us to live? How do we connect on it? What are the best ways? And because of the critical areas and the environmental protections that we have, we can't do it the standard way. And if you want to lay sidewalk, it's really, really expensive. So like even around the Inglewood Hill, Northeast Inglewood Hill Road has that roundabout where you can go to Mead or go to Town Center or whatever. That just doesn't have the sidewalk on that one side because it's really expensive, and you can't really have it on both sides because there isn't the density of population on one side. Those are very homes on a large area of land. But on the other side, you should have it, but they haven't done it yet, and it's still a sidewalk gap project. So knowing about all the projects, I think with all the numbers Paul comes up with, we need to do the things that we would do even if there isn't any more growth, because those are the things that need to get done. And then how much we grow and where we grow and what we do with Town Center. We don't want to do all the corridors before that. We've also started driving a lot less. People work from home a lot now, and the traffic counts have gone way down. So we do need to do what kind of is deficient now, do the stuff so we don't lose traffic impact fees or other things, and then think differently about our city and how we live and how we connect, and put critical areas into it. So that's my deal. I don't need the full 7 minutes. Thanks.
Good job. Okay, thank you. Words to the wise. All right. Calendar, any other updates? Nope. So just remember our special meeting at the end of the month. All right. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, all in favor?
So I'll cover that quickly. So the next meeting's a big one. It's the public hearing for the 2024 comprehensive plan. We'll also have a public hearing on the docket text amendment from the Eastlake Development LLC. That'll be a quick presentation, I think a quick public hearing, and then we have a work session on the development regulations associated with the middle housing and the comp plan. So buckle up.
Come with like snacks or something.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, so we didn't vote. Shall we adjourn? All in favor? Aye. All right. This is why I get to do this.
Two extra